Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Jakarta EE update call. We do these calls on the monthly basis. Today agenda is Jakarta EE release and release plan and progress update by Steve Milidge. Then we will actually first hear Will Lyons with the Jakarta EE program plan and budget. And then as a third point, we will hear from Ivar on the progress on Jakartifying the specification documents. And as the last point, I would like to invite all the developers and remind them of Jakarta EE wiki page and the opportunity there to share any relevant links for the developer community. Okay, so with that, I will invite Steve Milidge to take it over and present. I'll stop sharing and
okay.
Steve, if you want to take it over.
Yep. Okay, you see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Right. So I'm going to give an update of Jakarta EE 9, where we are in our planning. So I'm obviously the founder of Pyara. I'm also one of the project leads on the Jakarta EE platform, and for the Jakarta EE 9 release, I'm what we're calling a co-pilot with Kevin Sutter from IBM. So we're currently in the phase of putting together and the plan that will go in for review to both the steering committee and the specification committee, just to go through a bit of the process. So I did a similar update a month ago, and this is really going to follow on from that as some more decisions have been made since then. Just to recap a little bit of where we are. So Jakarta EE 8 was out in September, and that was the compatibility release. So that was based in the JavaX namespace. And the big thing is that we have open specifications that are managed through the Eclipse Foundation specification process, and we have an open source TCK, an open source development process. And so that completed the evolution of the specifications, the APIs from the JCP. And now we're in the phase of creating Jakarta EE 9. So for Jakarta EE 9, we're sort of targeting this as a tooling release. And I've got a little bit about what we mean by that. But it's going to be a limited scope in that what we're going to do is change the namespace to the Jakarta namespace. We're going to deprecate and remove some APIs, and we've got some slides on which APIs are remaining, which ones are we deprecating, and which ones we're adding. And also we're going to update the base JDK. And in parallel, to a large extent to that, we can also start thinking about Jakarta EE 10. So Jakarta EE 10 will be the first feature release, and the projects now for all the APIs, as I said earlier, are all in the Eclipse Foundation, and we can start working on those now while we're also at the same time creating the sort of Jakarta EE 9 tooling release. So the reason we're sort of saying it's a tooling release is that we're not adding any specifications other than some that have been pruned from from Java SE8. We're not really looking to make any breaking changes, so we're not introducing any new APIs, no breaking changes other than the namespace, obviously, and maybe some upward compatible changes where they're small. But predominantly it's the move from JavaX to Jakarta that we'll be completing in the API package names. So what we wanted to do was create a base for people to sort of target when they're dealing with the namespace change. So Jakarta EE 9 release will really give time for IDEs to build some tooling to help move applications that target the old Jakarta EE 8 JavaX namespace to migrate and target the Jakarta namespace. Similarly, it gives us an opportunity for vendors like Pyora to explore how we sort of also help end users and developers move this move across the namespaces and make their transition as smooth as possible. So we can look at explore compatibility layers. We can collaborate with other vendors on how we can build compatibility layers to support old applications running on Jakarta EE9. And then finally, also end users and developers out there, they can start taking these APIs, test and move their applications onto the new namespace, knowing that none of the behavior has changed. So any problems they encounter will likely be only due to the namespace, and may potentially support for that namespace change within their tools. One of the things making Jakarta EE9, one of the other key things is to do it as soon as possible. So we can get this tooling release out reasonably quickly and then move on to Jakarta EE10. So if you've been on the previous call, we were still in a flux and what is the scope of Jakarta EE9, which APIs are in, which APIs are out. And there's been a lot of chatter on the platform mailing lists. And based on the call this Tuesday, we're in a position where we believe that this is all agreed. It's still got to be put into the release plan and still got to be signed off, but most of the discussions have now been settled. So what we're going to do is prune a number of legacy APIs, and they'll be removed completely from Jakarta EE9. We're going to add in some APIs that used to be in Java SE8, but are no longer there. So they were pruned from SE, and we're going to add those in as optional APIs into Jakarta EE9. And again, I've got more slides on this. We're also then going to move all APIs to the Jakarta namespace, including those ones that we've added from Java SE8. And to make this more consistent, we are going to specify that to get platform compatibility, an application server or runtime must certify on Java SE11. This is so because there's a lot of debate around the APIs that have been pruned from 8 and what to do with them, whether to leave them in the JavaX namespace or move them to Jakarta. And we thought if we set the baseline as SE11, it was cleaner and more consistent to say that we're adding them in and we're adding those in at the Jakarta namespace. If we left the baseline at SE8, then obviously they would exist in Java SE and in Jakarta EE, which could be confusing. So we've taken the opportunity by bringing these in to also uprev the minimum for compatibility. Saying that though, we're going to require that API jars are released so they're suitable for use with JDKA individually. So what that means is that they will be compiled using Java SE8 class file format. So we're not going to compile them into Java SE11 class file format, as we know the API jars are often used widely outside there in the general ecosystem. And there's no need, given we're not allowing any API changes of any significance, to not do this, because no one is going to be pushing to put SE11 only APIs into their API signatures. So just to move on to actually the details of each specification. So what we're pruning is we're pruning Jakarta XML registries, RPC, and deployment and management APIs, which are all very old. And we're also removing support for distributed interoperability in EJB 3.2, which is the sort of CORBA IIOP aspects, as again, CORBA and IIOP is no longer in the JDK. So that's what we've agreed on removing. We're also making a couple of APIs optional. Jakarta Enterprise Beans 2.x, which is the old EJB, that was optional previously and remain optional. We decided not to prune it because it's quite complex and it would have delayed the project due to the mix and match of namespaces and exception hierarchies and things between the current EJB and the older EJBs. So doing that unpicking work was too complicated. And we're also pruning the old enterprise web services, which is the web service that predates the XML web services, or JAX WS as was. And the other thing, there's a lot of debate around optional APIs because part of the specification process requires that the compatible implementation will support all these APIs. So even though to get compatibility, something like Pyara doesn't need to implement these APIs, when we actually release the specification, then the implementation that goes along with the specification release has to support all these. So there's a burden on the specification team and the compatible implementation to support optional APIs. But at the same time, we still meet our goals, which is to sort of reduce the footprint of Jakarta E9 for new vendors. So new vendors wouldn't need to support any of these optional APIs. So there was a lot of debate around these APIs as they've been pruned from Java SE8 and therefore, officially went Jakarta APIs. And the conversation has gone back and forth probably for about 3 weeks. And we've eventually come to the conclusion that we will add all these APIs into Jakarta EE9, albeit most of them will be optional. So Jakarta activation will be added into Jakarta EE9 that supports Java Mail, and that will be mandatory. And then JAX-B as was, Jakarta XML binding, or JAX WS as was, which is Jakarta XML web services, and their other associated web services, APIs and specifications. They'll now all be added into Jakarta EE9 as optional APIs. And in addition to that, we're going to move all these 5 APIs into the Jakarta namespace. That was really driven by community feedback. So there was a lot of community feedback that these APIs are still in a lot of use, and they wanted to see them move into Jakarta namespace. Again, from a specification point of view, it was a burden to support these and move them. However, because of the community feedback, we've decided to take that work on and bring them into Jakarta EE9 to provide a solid base as to where these APIs have gone, and that they will be available to applications in runtimes that support them. Again, that does add a lot of work into the compatible implementation, as it needs to implement these APIs and support these APIs. So that covers what we're adding, removing, what's in and what's out of EE9. So just and then EE9, as we said, will be based on Java SE11 for implementations. And then, so if we move into the planning, so we haven't got full dates for this, but what we'll be doing is, from a project plan perspective, we're moving forward in 7 waves. So essentially, this is a rough view of what depends on what. So, from the first wave will be the lowest level APIs that have the minimal dependencies. So that includes Jakarta concurrency, annotations, messaging, as was JMS. And then wave 2 again brings in some other APIs that may, depend on wave 1. Then we bring in the big one, which is Jakarta context and dependency injections, wave 3. And then, following on for that is further and further, higher and higher APIs that depend on the most lower level APIs. So after each wave, we'll do a release review and check our progress against our plans. We don't have any dates for these yet, but we're targeting to agree some of these next week. And the Jakarta EE9 is, very much, there's a fixed quantum of work that needs to be done. So we have to pick a date when that work can be finished. When we move into maybe EE10, 11 and beyond, then we can follow a more release train mode, whereby we'd be able to pick a date for the release and then just pick up the APIs that are ready at that date and release a platform that way. But for EE9, we have to do all this namespace change, so the quantum of work is fairly fixed. Hence the sort of debates around scope. Finally, in Wave 7, we'll put out the full and web platform specifications, as they obviously reference all the lower level ones. So when it comes to API jars, we're going to try and get those out earlier than suggested from the wave diagram. So essentially, when I say artifact, I'm talking about jar files really for most people. So we're going to release RC, so release candidate API jars as soon as possible into Maven Central, without going through the full spec process and everything. So that essentially they'll be available for later waves, and tooling and Glassfish, Eclipse Glassfish, from which I'm a project lead of, can use those jars early, as early as possible. And that will speed up the delivery. So we won't have to release, won't have to wait for full Wave 1 release artifacts to be available at final versions in Maven Central before we can do Wave 2. We'll basically do the namespace change, push out a release candidate jar into Maven Central, and then we can move on to Wave 2 and Wave 3 and beyond, etc. Individual specs, because obviously I'm just on the platform project, which is an umbrella. Each of those can release a final specification at any time, subject to them following the Eclipse specification process. Another step we're aiming to do is, once all the API jars have been released, we're intending to do like a release candidate of the full platform. So that will include the API jars, a compatible implementation, and the TCK, but it won't have gone through the full spec process. All the documents necessarily won't be ready. And that will give an opportunity for us to look at tooling and make sure that everything's working before we then have a sort of a window, which may be a couple of months, where we'll then do the final release and put the final artifacts up into Maven Central and all the specification documents, etc., and go through the formal votes and IP flow, etc. We're looking at a date in Q2 2020 for the final release, and that means we'll be looking for an RC date, probably Q1 2020, to get some API jars in people's hands so that they can play with them and target implementations, etc. So again, these dates are going to get a bit more nailed down in the next week. We have to give a projected date by next Tuesday, I believe, just before Christmas, and we'll put that into a release plan. So that's where we are. We have the scope nailed down. We have a tentative quarter that we're going to release things on, and we have a plan, in the sense we have the order of things that are going to happen. The only thing we're now missing is the date. Anybody can contribute. There's a lot of this conversations on the platform dev mailing list, on the community list. To get to a date, I'll just show that we are putting together tracking on a spreadsheet of when APIs can move to the namespace. And what you'll see is actually most of the Wave 1 APIs, PRs are already done, and some of them are already merged. Actually doing the API change itself is not a big deal. Getting the implementations and the TCK will be a bigger deal. But we've already making progress on this, and I say many of the PRs for Wave 1 are already done. Once we can get those into Maven Central as release candidate, then the API changes can be done on Wave 2. And then some of the TCK work can then follow on. Basically, we just need artifacts for these. So anybody can get involved. Some of the PRs have been done by people who aren't sort of usual suspects, if you like. It's quite easy to do. It's just on GitHub. Each project has a GitHub repository, and you can start help making the PRs. You can raise issues. And like I said, probably at the beginning, is Jakarta EE10 itself can also start progressing, and we're you know, I'm project lead for concurrency, and we're already creating issues for that in the separate branches, and that can work in parallel to the API work. So a lot of the namespace work is just sort of boilerplate type work. So the innovative work can happen in parallel. So I just wanted to stress that as well. So that's all I've got. Is there any questions? No questions.
So it seems to be no questions, but as we all know, majority of people are preferring to view the recording of this this meeting. So this is the request for people out there. If you have questions and you see agenda, please send them to me prior to the call if you intend to look at the recording. And as always, to give us feedback on how useful these calls are. So I guess the next item on the agenda today is Ivar, and I see Ivar is here actually on the call. So Ivar will give us a progress report on Jakartifying of the specification documents. So Ivar, I'll stop sharing. If you wanted to share anything, please go ahead.
So yeah, I'm actually walking in the streets of Sofia right now, so I'm not able to share anything.
Oh, don't worry.
But,
if it's better, we can ask Will to go first. So don't worry about it.
No, it's good.
Okay.
I'm good. So
Okay.
the status of the Jakartification right now is I think there are 8 specifications that are under Jakartification, and with Jakartification we mean that they are we need to remove the references to the JCP specifications and the Java trademarks of the old JCP versions of the documents, and replace them with the Jakarta counterparts. And most of the specifications, I just checked this morning, has been started on, and they are pull requests, but these pull requests needs to be kind of approved by some committer on the project. So I would encourage the committer to a project, just check your GitHub repo and see if there are a pull request from a community member, because they're not able to merge it. So go in and see if the spec document is there. And if it isn't, then check with your project lead if the specification has been released, because the documents are just waiting there to come out. And there are a couple of specifications, I can't remember exactly which ones, that are, the document is released, but it hasn't been picked up yet. So if you are on a project where you suspect that this has happened, email on your project list to the project lead, which just should have gotten a notification that the spec document is there, and just go ahead and do it. So it's pretty easy work. It's just you grab the ASCII file and put it in the right directory structure, build it and see that it works, put it into the master branch, and then start working on it. And there are some projects that are almost done, like the security and the Jakarta REST. So look at the issues they have, where they have checklists for what you have to do. So I think that is more or less my update. Or should I include anything else? What do you think?
I think that's it. That's fine. It's actually call to action for everyone, right? Who is involved.
Yeah. One thing we should mention is that while we would certainly like all the specifications to be Jakartified for EE9, we won't stop it if they aren't. So we're good with going with the boilerplate specs as for E8 if it kind of jeopardizes the plan. But it would be nice to have all the specs on the same format. So it's just work that has to be done.
Right. And we will send this request out through Twitter and social media as well as on the community mailing list further on, right, Ivar?
Yeah, and they can always contact me and just ask if I can check if the spec document is out there, and I can pick it up from the Boxilla record and push it to their branch of their choice.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. As always, even on this topic, whoever is viewing the recording later on, please reach out to us if there are any questions. So moving on with the agenda, I'll just quickly, actually I'm not sharing anything, so I was going to say stop sharing, but I will invite Will Lyons. Will, if you want to present the program committee plan and the budget. I'm sure everyone is familiar that Will is chairing our steering committee, Jakarta EE steering committee call. And well, not just call, but leading the steering committee from chairing the steering committee. Thank you, Tanya. Anyways, turning over to Will. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Tanya. Hi, this is Will Lyons. I'm with Oracle, and I'm in product management, responsible for Jakarta EE and WebLogic server. And we thought, as Tanya says, I am also chair of the Jakarta EE Working Group Steering Committee. And we thought it might be interesting and useful to share what the steering committee is planning with respect to not only evolving the Jakarta EE technology, but building the community that develops the technology and promoting the technology in the broader marketplace in order to develop a healthy ecosystem for Jakarta EE. So we thought it would be worth reviewing the process and our plan for 2020 to build a healthy ecosystem for Jakarta EE and the budget that's in place to support that. So that's what I will be discussing. I'm going to start with a little bit of terminology. I'm not sure how familiar many of you are with the term working group. The Eclipse Foundation has the concept of a working group. And working groups are intended to facilitate collaboration around specific Eclipse projects, and they define a governance model and a process and norms for collaboration, for making decisions, for establishing goals, and so on. It's very helpful when you suddenly form a collaborative enterprise to have models for how you get work done in such a mode. And so the Eclipse Foundation Working Group is a model that is used for collaboration around Eclipse projects. And the Jakarta EE Working Group is one such working group. These are the members of the Jakarta EE Working Group. Oracle is my employer, and Pyara is a strategic member. And you can see IBM, Fujitsu, Red Hat, and Tommy Tribe are also strategic members. And there's, standards and definitions of what strategic members are. Typically, a strategic member regards the technology as enterprise Java technology, or excuse me, Jakarta EE technology as strategic to their businesses and are investing significant resources. We also have participating members who typically deliver products or services which are based on Jakarta EE technology. So this is our current membership of the Jakarta EE Working Group. As a group, we have defined a charter for what Jakarta EE is intended to accomplish. And this is just a screenshot of the working group charter document, which is available online. And you can see that the working group is intended to, in addition to evolving the technology, promote the brand, provide marketing services, manage a spec process, define compatibility rules, etc. Define licensing for IP flows for the technology that is included in Jakarta EE, manage a technical and business strategy, and fund the essential activities to making the working group function. So, and there's resources committed in funding and budgeting the activities. So we have gone through that process for planning for 2020. The Jakarta EE working group budget is aligned with an overall budgeting process that occurs in the Eclipse Foundation. So what we have done, and at a high level, what we've done to create our budget for 2020 is we started by defining some strategic goals and expanded those into more specific objectives and a plan for achieving the goals that were identified. And then we started with a 2020 budget based on known contributions to the working group from the members, from the strategic members and the participant members I described earlier. And then we, in the working group, went through a process of allocating budget to the various proposed activities in order to help achieve those objectives. We have concluded the budgeting process. We have an approved budget that was approved at the Jakarta EE Working Group Steering Committee meeting at the end of November. And this is a collaborative process involving active discussion over several weeks. So I'll describe a little bit of what we defined. First, as I mentioned, we defined some strategic goals. Of critical importance is the next Jakarta EE release, and you just heard from Steve about that. We need to get EE9 out, we know that, and that's a top priority. In addition, we need to establish a roadmap for future releases beyond EE9, so that's an important goal, and we want to be able to have a structured way of answering questions like how many releases will there be a year, what is the likely scope of those releases, what is the release model, etc. We also want to grow the developer community, not only developers who are contributing to the evolution of the technology itself, but developers who are consumers and build applications using the technology. We want to create programs that are helpful to developers. One area of focus, and this is something that Steve alluded to in the Jakarta EE9 plan, is we want to drive a plan for building out tooling support for the technology we're delivering. We want to grow the working group membership. As we engage with more members and vendors who have interests in this area, this helps strengthen the community, and it helps strengthen the funding of the working group, which can drive community success. So that's an important goal for us. And then just very broadly, we want to invest in growing awareness of Jakarta EE technology and the brand itself in the community and build engagement within the community. So these were the high-level strategic goals we discussed within the steering committee, which sets the strategic direction for Jakarta EE. And for each of these strategic goals, we set finer-grained objectives for what we want to achieve and a high-level plan for targeting those objectives in each one of the areas I just mentioned. So I won't read through all the individual slides, but in terms of EE9, we want to deliver a new release that accomplishes, the things which Steve described in more detail. We want to establish a roadmap and a release schedule. So that includes not only providing a target timeline for EE10 release, but establishing a technology direction, standards around backward compatibility, and a release model that can be used to organize development efforts. And that provides a mechanism for delivering innovation in the technology going forward. We want to grow the developer community, as I mentioned, not only from the perspective of contributors to the technology itself, but from the perspective of users of the technology, and not only the implementations that are being done at the Jakarta EE Working Group, but engagement with creation and delivery of the specification projects that drive the technology forward. We will establish programs for engaging with developers through user groups, through through evangelizing the technology and working with evangelist communities. And we want to define programs to engage people from the users groups with specification projects, and essentially promote through blogs and events. Also, we want to proactively work with vendors and producers of tooling, which is important for developing, testing, managing Jakarta EE applications. So we're going to actively invest in this as part of our overall plan. And we will also set a target for increasing the membership of the working group, and we intend to define targets and encourage each of the members of the working group to reach out and help with recruitment to build the membership of the working group itself so that we can grow the community. And we have a large set of activities, including activities like this one, to build awareness and engage with the community through events like live stream, tech talks, ongoing blogs, developer surveys, videos, sponsorship of conferences, notifications through mailing lists, and so on. So these are a more detailed description of activities that we will undertake to achieve our strategic goals. And that was a set of activities that the steering group agreed to. And then we took a look at our budget and allocated it to specific, to fund specific areas. Our budget is listed here. You can see in the 2020 column is our total revenue. So these are the revenues of the working group from member contributions. And that total is $1.3 million. And so that's the revenue, and the expenses are the way that funding is allocated. And so a significant portion of that is allocated to overall management of the Jakarta EE program itself, organizing events like this, having a developer advocate who can attend conferences and events and evangelize the technology. Marketing people to actually create, promote, monitor, measure the success of our marketing activities. Technical writers to develop content. We have a significant amount of infrastructure, which requires various DevOps tools and maintenance of those tools and maintenance of the overall dev infrastructure. So we're allocating resources to that. And we're also allocating resources to actually managing the specification process. For those of you who have been involved in actually creating the initial Jakarta EE specification, there's a process that needs to be managed, that needs to be executed. And it requires active management coordination, and it's an activity we need to fund. So that's the funding we have provided to the Eclipse Foundation for headcount that comes from the Eclipse Foundation to do management of all these things. In addition, we are funding a number of programs. The most significant is marketing, which I'll come back to in a moment, but we funded $285,000 for marketing activities, marketing programs in the coming year. The steering committee has also reserved a contingency fund in the event we need rapid, purchase of specific tools or increasing licenses fees in certain areas, or other contingencies, whatever might be required to actually facilitate our primary strategic objectives, including things like delivering EE9. So we've held back some funding to enable us to respond to events and needs as they occur. There's also legal fee contingency. There's complicated patents, IP licensing flows involved in a specification process and in the technology area we're managing. And we want to fund a certain amount of legal fees to deal with getting legal analysis, legal opinions on various issues as they come up. We think we're reasonably covered from the perspective of the hardware infrastructure that is set up for our builds and repositories and so on. So the total amount of spend on those programs is about $388,000. In addition to the headcount spending at the Eclipse Foundation of $760K and that program spend, the Eclipse Foundation generally invests a significant amount of time on administration of all of the work surrounding Jakarta EE, providing advice, meeting with analysts, orchestrating evolution of the working group structures, resolving major issues around strategic direction and funding. There's a significant amount of effort involved in defining a process that orchestrates work among all the vendors involved here. And so this allocation, this general administrative allocation, is intended to cover the administrative expenses that essentially get applied to this working group by the Eclipse Foundation. And those expenses total up to 1.3 million, which equals our incoming revenues. So these are the general areas in which the working group is investing in 2020. I mentioned the marketing budget. The marketing committee, which is one of the working committees in the Jakarta EE working group, has analyzed, the requirements and that are associated with meeting the strategic goals of the working group, and has translated each of the strategic goals for the foundation into corresponding goals from a marketing perspective. And the marketing budget that we've allocated to the marketing committee will be directed towards marketing activities that are in support of the major strategic goals that the working group has established. And so here are 5 of the major strategic goals and some of the marketing activities that will be undertaken in support of those goals. And they include, building community engagement, working with tooling vendors, and goals that are aligned with the overall goals of the working group. So That is the budget that we have established for the coming year. Our intention is that we will take the strategic goals and the plan we have put together for achieving these goals and define quarterly milestones or outcomes or targets associated with those, and monitor those at the steering committee to ensure that we're pursuing the goals we've set for ourselves successfully. My hope is that the steering committee, which from the initial formation of the working group has been very involved in operational day-to-day activities as a matter of necessity to bootstrap the activity, will move to more of an oversight role, and that we can move to enabling the individual projects and the other committees in the working group to actually drive many of the implementation activities that are required to make Jakarta EE successful. So we'll monitor our progress against this plan and adjust as required during the course of the year. So that's a summary of our plan and how we're allocating our resources next year. That concludes my slides. Are there any questions or comments? I figured discussion of budget would generate a fair amount of excitement in the audience, but I'm disappointed. There are no questions. Perhaps there will be a significant amount of interest among those of you who are watching the recording. In any case, thank you very much for the opportunity to present and for helping build the success of Jakarta EE. I'm all set, Tanya.
Thanks, Will. So I have a comment. This was a great presentation, and I'm hoping, as you were saying, that viewers of this recording will come back with questions if there are any. So with that, just one note from my side, unless there are some other topics from the community. So if you can stop sharing, and then I'll share my screen just briefly to remind people that we have created this Jakarta EE wiki page, particularly geared towards developers and putting the information out in a very fast manner, right? So the wiki is available to everyone. We will update as we as we have the news, but I would also like to invite the community to contribute to this page. Anyone who has the Eclipse account would be available to update the page. So this is just a quick reminder. We are going to plan to update this page, as I said. Also, just a reminder that all of our community relevant documents we also keep in the community folder. So for the month of December, the presentation that Steve and Will gave, you will be able to find in this folder after the call. I will invite Will and Steve to please drop your presentations in here. And as always, please reach out to let us know how we can improve and what type of information would you like to see on these calls in the future. Yeah, one more thing, the next update call is scheduled for January 15th. So I hope we will see more live audience then, and let us know if you have questions or topics for that call.
Hey, Tanya, where do we find this folder?
It's in the community folder. I will send you the link. I always send in the email update about this call, like a reminder for the call. I send the link, but let me actually send the link right away to in the chat, although
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of people in the chat here.
Maybe you could put the link in the calendar appointment as well.
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. I'll do that. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
So let me put the chat in chat. Oh, this is only. Okay. I will put definitely this link into the calendar invite as well.
Okay, so I just clicked on your link and it says I need permission. Is this not open to everybody?
Oh, it should be. Okay, hold on. I don't have to do that live, but I will definitely fix that up. Thanks for pointing out, though.
Great, thank you.
Oh, it's, yeah, this is the trick. I'll put it as anyone on the link, anyone with the link. Okay.
Yep, that did it, thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and Happy New Year. I don't think we'll talk to the wider community this month. So it's in the recording though, so I wish everyone Happy New Year, and then we'll talk again January 15th. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.